Okay, so welcome back to the second part of this rating system tutorial. We've got a lot to go over, so I'm just going to quickly explain the file or directory structure that we're going to be using, and it's important that we get this right. As I said in the last part, you need to make sure you tie this into your site and make it make sense. Obviously, don't go creating new files or folders just because of me. You might have an existing function file that you might be able to place the functions that we're going to be creating within. So as long as you keep your, your consistent structure and you think about this sensibly, then that's not a problem. But I'm going to go through the directory structure in terms of this tutorial, just in case you're following from the start. Okay, so to start with, in our root directory, which I'm in currently, we've got this articles file here. So let's go ahead and open that up. There's obviously nothing in there at the moment. Now I've got a folder called core, and the folder core contains two additional folders or directories. The first one's DB, which contains a folder called connect, and these are all PHP files, by the way. Connect obviously just connects to our database, so that's important. We need to be connecting to our database. I've then got a folder called func, which stands for function, which contains two files here. Now the first one, articles, deals specifically with retrieving this result set that we saw in the last part, or the first part of the tutorial. And the rating PHP file contains the functions that relate to actually rating our material. So we're going to be including all these files one way or another within our index page, articles.php. In this example, I'm just going to include them all directly in. I'm not going to create an overall file which includes them and then we include that one file. I'll give you a quick example. We could, for example, say, include core/init.php, and init.php would include all of the files here, and then we only need to do one include. But I'm going to list them out, and that's just for the purpose of, while we're working on the index, we know what files we have available to us. It's entirely up to you how you do this, as I said, but let's not waste any more time talking about that. Let's go ahead and connect to our database and start to retrieve these results. That's what we're going to be doing in this part of the tutorial, retrieving these article titles and any other data we need to as well. Obviously we can't return the score, the rating at the moment, because we have no rating data available to us. So let's go ahead and connect to our database. So we need MySQL connect, and you hopefully should be familiar with this function. It just takes the server name, in this case localhost, the username and the password for your MySQL server, and then we want to go ahead and we want to select a database to use. And remember, my database is called website, okay, and our articles table is within that. So I'm just going to be connecting to website, an imaginatively named database. So we can go ahead and we can close this off now. We don't really need it in the way, we're not doing anything else within this file. So I'm going to go ahead and require this into my script, just to make sure that I can connect, obviously. So I'm going to say require core/db. Remember, it's within the db database folder, and I'm including connect.php. We also want to go ahead and include articles and rating. These are just going to contain functions that are going to allow us to, call these functions, process different things, blah, blah, blah. So let's go ahead and just copy this down just to save a bit of time. And we'll go ahead and include core/func/articles.php. And we'll do the same for rating.php as well. So rating.php. Okay, so we've got our database connection, and we've got our two functions or function files. Let's just go ahead and make sure no errors appear. No, so I assume that we're connecting to our database correctly. Now let's go ahead and actually start to create the functionality to get these articles to appear. Okay, so let's go ahead and create or outline our function. So our function is get. Let's go ahead and create our PHP tags first. Our function is called get articles. Now, if you've never worked with retrieving database records this way, it's quite a useful way of doing things. So you might learn something here if you haven't used this before. I tend to use this method it's quite useful to return data. But if you don't understand anything, just take a double look at this. It's relatively straightforward, but some of the things I'm using might be new to you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to allow a limit to be passed. Remember that we were only showing 5 articles on the first part of this tutorial. And that's because I passed a limit through of 5. So let's go ahead and just escape some of this data. So I'm going to say limit equals int limit, and that just means that although we're only passing an integer within our code, we're not allowing users to pass. We may do in the future, so you need to make sure that this is an integer, because we're going to be passing this through a query and we don't want SQL injection. So I'm now going to create a variable called articles, and that's going to be equal to an array. So this is what we're going to be returning in the function. So down here we're going to be returning articles. But within here, we're going to be placing all of the articles from our database table, bearing in mind our limit, so however many records we decide to show. We're going to be placing that within an array, which is called articles, and we're going to be returning that. So then within our index page, we don't have to include, we don't need to sort of create just all of the code in there. We can call this function wherever we want, because we've included it, we can use it anywhere. So let's go ahead and write this query out. So we've got query equals MySQL query. We've assigned this to a variable so we can use it a bit later on or in the next line. So let's go ahead and write our query. This is going to be select ID. We're not actually, we are going to be using this. So ID title rating total. Remember, that is the total amount of votes, i.e. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 added up. And then we've got rating count, which is the amount of votes that have been cast, or the amount of ratings that have been given. And this is going to be from articles, and then we're going to limit, and we're going to pass in that variable that comes from our function here. So let's just go over this for those of you that are unsure about queries. We've got select ID. We're selecting the ID field, the title field, the rating total field, the rating count field from our articles table, and we're limiting it by a certain amount. Now what we want to do is we want to loop through these results. Okay, so we're going to loop through these results and we're going to place them into the articles array that we've created already. So I'm going to say while, create my block there, and I'm going to say while row is equal to MySQL fetch assoc, which is fetching an associative array, which means that the keys are values, not just integers, of our query. Okay, so when we loop through this, we'll get each record displayed. So for example, we could say echo row title. We're not actually going to be echoing this. This is just an example. And in articles.php, we could call get articles, and then we could say we'll limit to 5. Let's go ahead and refresh, and you see that the titles of the top 5 articles are displayed. Bear in mind here, I'm not storing when these articles were inserted. If we go back to our database table here, I'm not actually recording a timestamp or anything like that. You could go ahead and order this by ID if you really wanted to. It's probably not the best way to go about it, but you could say order by ID, or if you were storing a timestamp in here, you could say order by timestamp. Just go and put that in. But yeah, we'll leave this out for now. Okay, so let's crack on with this. What we want to do is we want to say articles, and we're going to use these 2 brackets. So essentially saying add a new element to this articles array, and the element that we're adding is another array. So we're now creating a multi-dimensional array. I'm going to pull this down a bit just for readability, and I'm going to set the first key to ID, and this is going to contain row ID. So we're looping through and we're adding on an array within articles with the first key ID. So hopefully this makes sense. It's just a way of storing our data, and I'll go ahead and print this out in a moment, just so you can see how it looks once this is all done. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to indent these. So I'm going to say title. I'm going to do the same thing, row, and you've guessed title. And then I'm going to say rating equals. Now, this is a bit of a hard one because we haven't actually created the functionality to rate. However, we need to apply some logic to this before we output anything. Now, at the moment, everything's 0. And what we're eventually going to be doing is we're going to say rating total divided by rating count. And this will give us the average rating of all of the ratings that added up and then divided by the amount that's been rated. Now this is fine, but at the moment this value is 0. We don't want a division by 0, and that's exactly what we'll get if we run this now. First of all, we've got this undefined variable. Sorry, that's my fault. We need row rating total there, and row rating count. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh. We've got division by 0 5 times, which we would expect because we're dividing here by 0. So we need a way to combat this, and the way to do this is if we sort of put these values into their own variables. We don't need to do this, but in fact we won't. We don't want to confuse matters. I'm going to create an inline if statement, if you like, a ternary operator. So I'm going to create some brackets here, and if you're confused by this syntax, then I'll explain it in just a moment. There we go. And in here, I'm going to essentially within these brackets here, we're saying if this is true, anything after this question mark, do this, or set this value here to this. Otherwise, set it to 0. So we're going to check first of all if the row rating count doesn't equal 0. So I can go ahead and paste that in. I'm going to say doesn't equal 0. So essentially what this line now reads is if the rating count doesn't equal 0, okay, so we won't get a division by 0, set this rating value here to this. Otherwise, set it to 0. So now what we get is nothing. There's no errors because we're checking this rating count value beforehand. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and we can actually start to output. We've returned articles. So let's go ahead and say, we're saying get articles. I'm just going to say articles equals get articles. Then I'm going to use print r on articles. And what print r will do is it'll give us a visual representation of this array. It will show it to us how we've returned it. Now at the moment it just looks a bit messy and long and hard to read. So I'm going to go ahead and echo, and I'm going to place some pre-tags around this to format it correctly. And then I'm going to pass an optional true parameter, and as if by magic this is going to have formatted out nicely like this for us. So essentially what we've done is for each record, so for record 1, which is now 0 because we've 0 indexed arrays, we've got this first value here 1 2 3 4 5 and the data associated with it. So we're obviously going off track here because this is a tutorial about a rating system. However, this is the fundamentals of grabbing data, and this does tie into it because we need to be able to apply this rating system for any data that we want to return. So as long as you understand this concept, then we can safely move on and start to actually display our ratings, set our ratings, etc. So in the next part we'll be just slightly finishing up on this and actually outputting something useful, and then we'll go ahead and start implementing some additional functions which allow the users to rate our articles.